Well, I guess it is. And did you hear that?
Just a little bit. I heard a little.
Yeah, there it is. Hey, does it feel like I haven't done this show for a little bit? Welcome back.
It's new.
I've been on a hiatus for a little bit, and I came back with a really important show for all of us. I think the case against. The MLS pins and the way in which compensation is promised through the MLS was brought maybe 2022, I believe. Jennifer Nosalic, Randy Hirschhorn, and Tracy Hirschhorn acted in behalf of all consumers who were upset with the way that compensation is being delivered to the agents in our history. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I've got a very good friend to our show, Kate Lanagan MacGregor from Agent Rising. She also owns her own brokerage, a fantastic communicator, great teacher, and truly understands what's going on. Welcome back, Kate.
Thank you, Larry. It's nice to see you and welcome back from your time away. I hope you had a great time.
I did. I bought a property in Maine. We've talked about it, and I'm
We
doing
have.
yeah short term rentals. It's just been unbelievable, but it took a lot. That's not what the show is about. That's just us
No.
catching up. Yeah. Um, the show is interesting because there are thoughts on all sides about this. Share with me what you've been hearing, Kate.
So thank you, Larry, and thank you for having me on. This has been a passion of mine for a while, as you know. So I wanted to start by saying there's a couple of National Association of Realtors antitrust lawsuits. And this is something that this one in Massachusetts is somewhat of a copycat in some ways, where they had the same complaints. And that had to do with what the antitrust issues, and that they felt like we were anti-consumer in our price fixing of commissions, and also in this case that the seller has to pay the buyer agent fee. So ultimately, that's the nut that's the final nut of it, is that the sellers do not feel like they should be compelled to have to pay a buyer agent fee. So that was kind of the start of it.
Well, that whole who's paying their buyer's agents for a long time were saying, "Oh, work with me because you don't have to pay me. The seller's going to pay me." That has
Yeah.
never been true. That has never
No.
been true before and after this. The commission is put within the deal somehow. And now with
Right.
this new law, it's going to be put in a different way. But the agent is compensated for their ability to negotiate and get the deal done in a professional manner, a professional legal manner. But we're just changing the ways we're doing it. Is this a help to the consumer or is this a help to the agencies?
So the whole idea behind all of this is that, in real estate, we love to say that we put our consumer at the center of the transaction, and that the consumer should have decisions to be able to be made, and they should be able to drive the bus essentially. And then what has happened is that the way that we've done business historically, and especially in Massachusetts, where we went from sub agency to seller agency and buyer agency, but didn't change exactly how the money was transferred, became kind of confusing for people. And in this particular case, in this part of the lawsuit, MLSPIN said, "Okay, basically, we will settle, and we will work with not having that buyer agent fee be a mandatory fee on every listing." So
Right.
that was kind of how that transition happened.
Right. And
Yeah.
let's just take a moment and talk about how the paperwork goes. So both listing agent and buyer's agents who do the full paperwork correctly, which means you get a disclosure and you get an exclusive agreement for the sale of the property. If you fill that out, in there on both sides in the existing paperwork is the compensation. I will work with you. I will help you buy a house, and you will pay me X commission. Now they go out and then they go on to the market, and the market says, well, we're not going to give you that. The seller's not going to give you that. The seller's only going to give you a half a point less than that. So then you're still forced to go back. If you want to keep that compensation, you're still forced to go back to the buyer and say, hey, make up the difference. I don't think many agents do that. What do you think?
But ultimately, like if you like just to even take what you just said, which is absolutely, I think, really important. Before that transaction even happens, the seller has made a contract with the seller's agent on what they're going to be compensated. And the buyers have had their buyer agency contract, and that has specified what they're going to get paid. And so now what remains is how is it going to look and how is it going to factor into it? So it's, yes, MLS has had a promise of money to that buyer agent for bringing that ready, willing, and able buyer. And that has been what our practice has been. But as you said, a lot of times that is not in alignment with what that buyer agent has already been contracted to earn, if you will.
If they
So
sign that exclusive.
Exactly. And if not, then they've been winging it. And so I'm going to anticipate that these contracts that we have, which are great contracts because they spell out the value of on the list side of what the seller's agent is bringing that seller, and then on the buy side, why that buyer's agent is so important for that buyer. So if you go through the agreements, then you are actually helping them establish that value and communicate your value to that buyer and to that seller. So I think this is in that way a good thing because it's, we're not just doing things the way it's always been done and we're not hurrying through it. We're actually giving our value and we're helping them through what can be a very complicated process.
Right. And in specific about this commission and how that commission is being presented to the public. And it can be considered antitrust if you're a consumer and you don't want to stick by what, so all of that money goes into the deal and you get, you can write off that portion of whatever was in that final deal as it's written on the ALTA, used to be the HUD.
Yes. Yep.
Now we're just doing that differently. So the buyer is going to pay the agent separately from the actual deal. And that then brings up the thing, well, is that bad for the buyer? Because now the buyer has to buy the house and now pay this. And you came up with an alternative. What is that alternative?
Right. So let me just back that up. I do think that like this practice is going to start with the seller, right? The seller's agent is going to be talking with a seller at this point in time, and they'll very likely have a worksheet to work through. There'll be a disclosure for them. This is also part of the MLS settlement that there's a disclosure that the seller will sign saying that they've talked about this with the seller's agent. And what that will happen is they will have their choice to either pay nothing to a buyer's agent, offer nothing, or offer whatever they want to offer. Right. Okay, now this has been going on in another part of our country through the Northwest MLS, just proactively did it. And they are finding that most people are doing it the way it's always been done, but that does not matter, like for our purposes today. When you're with the seller, you'll say to the seller, okay, so here's what's going to happen, is that maybe that buyer agent can collect that fee outside of what we're going to be talking about. A lot of times that buyer may not have enough savings for both the deposit and for that commission. Right. So it may be, according to this worksheet, and I'm just preparing you, seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that there may be something where they're asking for a concession. And this concession will be it will be included in the transaction. Okay, so it will not be on top of the transaction, it's included in the transaction. So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just want you to know that we may be seeing that. And what I will do is, again, as your seller's agent, I will help you understand what the best value is for you with the offers that come in. Right. Okay, I will spell it out so that you understand everything. Just know that we may see some of that, especially if there is no offer of compensation. Okay. So do you understand? Of course
Well,
you do.
yeah, well,
Not you. I'm being my role playing. I know you understand, Larry.
yeah,
So
but I think a lot of people don't understand this because it's first of all it's a money conversation and people kind of
right, which is
glaze
always
over.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, am I winning or am I losing? Is the first
Right.
thing, and you have to calm that conversation down.
Yeah.
An agent
Absolutely.
is a professional that has all kinds of different skills that they have to bring to the table to help this get done in the right way. And a good
Yeah.
buyer's agent and a good seller's agent make that whole process smoother. So they're deserving
Right.
of some
Yes.
compensation for that, for their
Oh,
professional.
100%.
Yeah,
I think that statistics have shown that over 90% are using real estate professionals.
right.
I mean, our value I think has been established. One more thing about sellers is that seller may say, "Oh, if I don't offer something, will those buyers agents still show our house?" Which again can get us into some antitrust steering or
Yeah,
questions of that. So we've got to be real careful on how we communicate,
yeah,
because it's with that person. So that's the sell side. And I'm going to jump into the buy for just a minute. And so on the buyer's side, now remember, the buyer has always brought all of the money to the table. So
right.
however we slice it and dice it, they're the ones with a bag of cash. And I've always said that the house pays, right? It just matters how it goes and how it's distributed. Now that buyer has a similar worksheet that is shown to them when they're hiring their buyer's agent. And on it, it's going to say, this is the compensation I charge for my professional fees. And then a lot of times there will be a promise of compensation on MLS. It's no longer mandatory, so it's optional. It may not be there. So here are some steps that we could do instead. We could You could pay me outside of that transaction, uh, or we could include it as a concession. And here's what it would look like. And then some people will say, well, doesn't that mean if they're adding in money, right? They're adding in a commission, then that's going to throw off the appraisals. And what I want to say is that all of the listings that we've had, right, they all have the full, right, both sides of the commission in it. So it's not, it's just a different line item, a different way of it coming in. And so that
Right,
would be
right.
what the communication is. And you can bet if MLS PIN has made this settlement, they're going to have forms for us and that need to, number one, that
More
can help us
paperwork.
with this.
More
So we don't
paperwork.
have to be too afraid. We don't have to be too afraid, right? And so will MAR. MAR will have forms for us as well.
Right.
The other thing is that, there's that disclosure that the seller has to say that they had that conversation with their agent.
Yeah.
So that has to be done as well. And then the third,
I'm sorry.
you go.
I was just going to give a little insight because we have audience that's not from this area. MLS PIN is the MLS Pinergy. It's the MLS for the Boston, New Hampshire, Rhode Island parts of area. Northeastern MLS, is that the other one that you mentioned? Northern.
Yes, that's it.
Where is
Chicago
that?
area. Chicago
Chicago area.
area.
So each area has its MLS, and talk about antitrust. I mean, they have a lockdown on the properties in that area, but that is not for this show. But you are best if you have your property on the local MLS, and they send it out to the all of the consumer sites, the Zillows, the Realtor.coms, or so everybody ultimately has it, including your competition. Everybody is looking at it. In there, not always is the commission and the compensation transferred, aggregated over. And that's another kind of confusing part of this.
It is, although it's supposed to be. We have a clear cooperation policy that it's supposed to be there. But let's not worry about that. Like I think that yes, this is what's happening in our state, and it is kind of I laugh because there's those lawsuits, the bigger lawsuits that are going on nationally have been going on for significantly longer. And I always say like, well, the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta came here first, and we're going to be the first to tackle this issue. And so, we are going to be the pioneers on some of how this is going to work out in Massachusetts. Again, with
Boston
lots
was
of
one
good
of the first.
resources.
Boston was one of the first areas in the country to form a real estate group to oversee our actions. It happened here
Right.
first as well. So
Yeah. So anyway, it's for those who are from not in Massachusetts. This is, I think, something to, just be aware of, and but know that as professionals, we can handle this. And we can, and we will, from doing it, take care of our consumers better and honor our consumers and make sure that they know that they are making the decisions.
right.
And, the way that we transition in real estate sometimes does do a little bit of weaving. And in this particular case, I think that this is going to help foster better communication with both our sellers and our buyers.
Right. And the reason why an appraiser, some people might have thought, well, the appraiser doesn't have, doesn't know the end price, but they actually do because they ask for the executed purchase and sale, and in that
Yeah.
document is what are all the final agreements have, and that commission would
Right.
be agreed that would be agreed there. Um,
Right. I think from an appraisal standpoint, for the most part, if the buyer's agent and the seller's agent are working their transaction, it's going to be very similar to what they have now.
right.
And if it's not, then that will be something that's notated. And I'm sure that again, the communication will be apparent. So I think
Right.
that I have trust that the appraisers can do it, and I also have trust that the mortgage lenders are going to figure this out as well.
Right, right. Well, they will take the word of the appraisers, and we know from certainly the last couple of years when prices just went skyrocketed, and there were no comps for anything. Everything was 50, 100, 200,000 over asking. That the appraisers
Yeah.
were able to understand that the market was changing and write a
Right.
narrative. So those appraisals, because all of a sudden we thought their properties were more. Hey, let's give the consumers some good news. The good news is, even though inflation is coming down, jobs are still good right now. Prices are not going up like they were in any point. And even though there's still so many more buyers than there are some houses out there, it's not you're not bidding against 70 people. You're bidding against five.
Right. Right.
And
It
yeah, please make sure that when you're negotiating with the buyer, the seller, that you ask the listing agent, what besides money does the seller want?
Yes,
And
terms are very important. Yeah,
very
all the
important.
time.
Very important question, and a simple question. And if they know, they'll give you that answer because everybody wants it to go smoothly as possible. And these are complicated transactions. And so
They are.
sometimes it
And
doesn't.
that's why I feel like, yeah, that's why I feel like if we put that consumer first, and our goal is to take care of that person who trusted us enough to hire us, and we help them through this, they will be lifelong friends and grateful to us forever. And we will have been able to do right by them. And I'm sure and I'm confident that the resources will be there as this unfolds. Like we still have, I mean, that it has to get approved by the court, and then it's another 100, I think 110 days. So this is not something that's going to be sprung on someone tomorrow.
Right.
And there's tons of great resources out there right now if somebody wants to catch up to speed on it.
Well,
So
certainly,
we're going to be okay.
yeah. Well, certainly, Agent Rising, your program
Yes, yes, I have a
is
special page set up.
and that's agentrising.com. A great
Yes,
resource
thank you,
for
Larry.
agents here in all of Massachusetts, right?
Massachusetts, and there's actually the whole national stuff is on there too. So this whole issue has been covered, and from it, and it's from my perspective, right? So I always like to put a disclaimer there: is that this is how what I see, and this is what I believe is happening. And I don't. I mean, I definitely don't have a window behind the curtain, but I do think that from everything that I've read is that I am so grateful to be able to work with the consumers that we have, that if this is a benefit for them, then I'm sure that I can figure this out, and I'm sure that we all can, and it's going to be a benefit in the end. And
Right.
honestly, for so long since buyer agency started, like this has been the spirit that the seller is paying the seller and the buyer is getting compensated from the transaction. Like this is not new. It's just a newer way of doing things
Right.
and a newer appreciation of our clients.
Right, right. And speaking of your clients, one of the biggest complaints about real estate agents is lack of communication. And truly, if your agent can't answer these questions, buyer or seller, you need another agent. You
Yeah,
need someone that truly understands how these things are changing, shaping the way houses are bought and sold. And you need to have like boots on the ground, to understand
yes,
how it changes from week to week. You know, uh,
absolutely.
for a moment, spring market. Everybody knows there's a spring market. When does that spring market happen? Well, it usually happens the first really nice weekend is not
I know
it
the snow melts.
because everybody's out. That first nice weekend, everybody. The second nice weekend is quite often, and you find out where last week there were three houses on the market, and all of a sudden this week there's 24. That's the beginning
Yeah,
of that spring market. That's what's and
yeah, yeah.
but at this point, with so many buyers out there, put your house on the market, put it on at the right price, and people will come. Uh, there's always, in the way the
Absolutely.
compensation is today, there's always you'll see anything from a 2% commission, a 1% commission, a 3% commission. If you're an agent and you're looking at that as you're helping your people, you're not really helping your people. You're focused on yourself, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be focused on what your
That's
clients
ultimately
need.
like that idea about who you're having that conversation with, and that
Right,
gets back to that whole idea about antitrust,
right.
right? And so that's a really good litmus test, and so that's a great summary of it, actually, Larry.
We're in the mutual admiration society. You and I have been for
Yes,
years.
we are. Yes, we are.
Have been for years. What else is going on in the market right now? We've got a couple of more minutes here.
So, what else is going on? So, I would say some other interesting things that are going on in Massachusetts is the initiatives to have more housing available and
Mm.
looking for ways of having accessory dwelling units and in-laws be part of being approved automatically versus needing a variance. So that is something to keep an eye on. Another thing that I think is going on, as you said, is that the there's not as many people going for each property, and so pricing your house accordingly is really a good idea. And honestly, like just knowing that your time will come if you are a buyer and you've been frustrated, you've lost out. Don't give up before the miracle happens.
Yeah, and
And
and being more and more focused. It's sadly, it's a bit of a full time job for the buyers. It's hard work right now. You have to be on top of it. You have to be ready. You have to have your paperwork ready, ready, willing, and able. And that's what they
right,
say. That's what the seller wants. Um, they're ready to sell, so they want somebody ready, willing, and able. Um,
exactly.
I,
And I think
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, ultimately, it's the preparation and the buyers and sellers that are out there listening to this. It would be great for you to get educated on this as well, because as you get educated, you will be positioned for success. And I always say, if you confuse, you lose. And so, being ahead of the game and being on top of things and being an educated consumer, I think, can really help you as well.
And they are so much more educated than they ever were before. There.
Well, yeah,
I don't want to sound like the old white guy. Unfortunately, I am. But there was a period of time when agents controlled everything, and that is
yeah,
long gone. The consumer, a educated consumer, one who understands that Zillow estimates are not always accurate. Um, uh, uh,
yeah,
there's a lot of disinformation out there. And you
yeah.
have to be able to understand the difference between the two and know what is real and what's real for your clients.
And a good real estate professional will help you with that, and be honored to do so, because ultimately they are our big why, and they are the reason we're here doing this. And so anything that we can do to make it as pleasurable as possible and less stress. I said we all need an easy button. Make it easy for them.
One of the questions that I ask other agents when I meet them is, tell me about the favorite house that you sold. Good agents, remember, the families, and it's not always the house, and it's not always the price point. It's the whole um, experience of buying your home. That's such a special thing in your life. Where you live, I think, is important. And I think there's people that think it's a house, it's a box, it's this price, it's this neighborhood, it's these schools, but it's far more than that. It's where you make your memories, and where people grow up and change, and that's kind of the beauty of it. But it's a big deal.
It's a big deal, and it's a wonderful. It's the American dream, Larry. Right? It's the American dream that we have this image of home ownership, and as we are being more receptive to what that consumer wants from us, we are transitioning, and that makes me really excited. I know for a lot of people, there's a little bit of fear there, but you know what? On the other side of fear is growth, and so I'm very excited to be part of that transition.
Yeah, yeah. The other side of fear for me often is more fear.
Like
But
fear it. There's
I,
so many there's so many acronyms for that. I always say, like, if you're not in fear, then you're not growing.
you're
So
right, right. Yeah,
appreciate that fear and realize that that fire in your belly is going to make you a better professional.
yeah. My wife often says, I like to see a man sweat. But anyway,
I love
it's
it.
such always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you
I'm
too, Larry.
so
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad I came off my hiatus and get back to work here, and sharing information. On Very soon, I am meeting with Dr. Jim O'Connell, and Jim has been instrumental in changing the way that medicine deals with homeless, and not just here in the Boston area, where he's a fellow at Harvard Medical and Boston, Mass General, but all over the country. He'll be a great show, and I know that you'll be back this year because you'll be here on the Gratitude Show, I hope, for the third year in a row.
Yes. Yes. Well, and speaking of gratitude, I'm so grateful for what you do for all of us in this industry and for making that connection between the public and the real estate world. You don't even know the impact that you have and how far away it is. So thank you so much. I'm very grateful.
I appreciate that. It's just such a pleasure. Uh, Here comes or supposed to be. This is working very sluggishly. There you go. That's what I use. Screen Thank you, Kate Lanagan MacGregor from Agent Rising and Bold Real Estate. Such a great pleasure. Thank you again. Come and join us soon.
Recording stopped.